The hired killer cocked his Colt revolver in the dark cabin. Three armed men had come up the mountain that night to murder the woman he loved. They thought they had walked into the home of a blind man alone by his fire. They thought wrong because the dark was his country, and no man who walked into it walked back out. He had not seen the sun in 10 years. But tonight in his own house with the lamps cold and the fire smothered, he was about to teach three killers what a blind man could do when the woman he loved was on the other side of the door. This is the story of Ezekiel Callahan, the blind mountain man of the Colorado Rockies, and the mail-order bride who walked 1,000 miles to find him. Stay with me by the fire tonight. You will not want to miss what happens next. The mountain did not speak in pictures. To Ezekiel Callahan, the mountain spoke in rhythms. He stood on the porch of his cabin, that gray November afternoon, the rough-hewn wood vibrating beneath his boots, telling him the foundation was settling deeper into the frost. The air smelled sharp like crushed pine needles and distant snow. Most men looked at the sky to predict the weather. Ezekiel simply breathed it in. The moisture clung to the inside of his nose and coated his beard. A storm was coming, a big one. He stepped off the porch with the easy confidence of a man who had walked this same path 5,000 times. His hand reached out and found the guiding rope he had strung between the cabin and the wood pile 3 winters ago. His fingers brushed the coarse hemp. 5 steps, 6 steps. Stop. He reached down and his hand found the handle of the splitting axe exactly where he had left it, leaning against the chopping block. He did not need to see the log to split it. He felt the grain of the wood with his thumb. He found the knot. He positioned the blade. With a smooth, practiced swing, he brought the axe down. The crack was clean and sharp. The wood split perfectly in 2. Lift, swing, split. In his world of darkness, this repetition was peace. It was order. The loss of his sight in the mining blast 10 years ago had taken away the sun, but it had given him a deep, unwavering focus. He knew the location of every tree within a mile by the sound of its leaves in the wind. The oaks rustled like dry paper. The pines whispered like ocean waves. The cottonwoods clattered like dice in a wooden cup. He stacked the firewood in the crook of his powerful arm. The temperature was dropping fast. He could feel the cold nipping at his ears. The birds had already gone quiet, huddling down for the coming freeze. Ezekiel turned back toward the cabin. He took 1 step, then froze. His head tilted to the side. His ears, sensitive enough to hear a squirrel scurry across dry leaves at 50 yards, twitched. The wind gusted, rattling the dry branches of the aspens. But under the wind there was something else. It was faint. It was inconsistent. It did not belong to the rhythm of the forest. It was not the chitter of an animal or the groan of settling timber. He held his breath. He waited for the wind to die down. There it was again, a jagged, gasping sound, a sob. Ezekiel tightened his grip on the firewood. He was not alone. Someone was out there in the freezing mist, and they were terrified. They say a man needs his eyes to survive the frontier. They say the mountains have no mercy for the weak or the broken. But they had never met Ezekiel Callahan. Darkness had taken in his sight 10 years ago. Yet he saw things no one else could. He saw the changing weather in the ache of his bones. He saw the path home by the song of the creek. To Ezekiel, the world was a symphony of whispers. But on this cold November evening, the wind carried a new sound. It was not a beast, and it was not a storm. It was a sound that would change his quiet life forever. It was the sound of a breaking heart. Welcome back to Frontier Rescue Stories. We are glad you are here by the fire with us tonight. If you love tales of resilience, of love earned through hard winters, of the quiet honor of mountain men, and the women brave enough to find them, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and tell me where in this great country you are listening from tonight. I want to know which fires are burning across America while we share this story together. Now close your eyes and let us head into the mountains. Ezekiel Callahan did not panic. Panic was a luxury for men who could see where they were running. For Ezekiel, panic was a quick way to walk off a ledge. He carefully stacked the firewood on the edge of the porch. He moved with deliberate slowness. He reached beside the door frame and found his staff. It was a thick piece of hickory, polished smooth by years of use and hardened by fire. He gripped it tight. The wood felt warm and familiar in his calloused hand. He stepped off the porch again. This time he did not reach for the guide rope. He stepped out into the open void. He tapped the ground. Thud, thud. The earth was freezing hard. He navigated by memory and by the echo of his tapping. The trees on his left grew thick and close. He could hear the wind whistling through their tight branches. To his right, the ground sloped away toward the creek. The crying had come from the slope. Ezekiel moved into the tree line. He stopped every few paces to listen. The woods were holding their breath. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by a heavy, fearful silence. The stranger had heard him coming. The mountain in autumn of 1868 had been a different place. Ezekiel remembered standing in the entrance of the Silver Crown mine alongside his father, Thomas Callahan. He was 21 years old. He was strong as an ox and twice as stubborn. They were going to be rich. Bonanza silver, his father had said. We struck it, son. The whole family is set for life. The fuse burned too fast. Or perhaps it had been packed wrong. Or perhaps God had simply decided that the Callahan men had reached too far. Ezekiel never learned the truth. He remembered the flash, brighter than the sun. He remembered the sound like the world ending, and then nothing. 3 days later, he woke in a tent hospital in Denver. His mother, Margaret, was there, weeping silently. His two younger brothers, Caleb, who was 18, and Jedediah, who was just a boy of 15, stood at the foot of the bed. He could not see them. He could only hear them. When will the lights be turned back on? He had asked. The silence that followed told him everything. His father was dead. The lights were never coming back on. He would never see the sun again. That was 10 years ago. 10 years of learning to live again. Learning to walk without stumbling. Learning to eat without spilling. Learning to be a man in the dark. He had learned all of it. He had become hard capable, dangerous in his own quiet way. But he had never learned how to stop being lonely. Until tonight. Down the slope, Emmeline Hayward huddled against the base of a massive cedar tree. She pulled her thin woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was useless. The damp cold of the mountains did not just touch the skin. It soaked into the bone. Her boots were wet, and her toes had lost all feeling an hour ago. She had only meant to take a shortcut to the main road. The man who had picked her up at Pine Hollow Station had seemed kindly enough. Older fellow, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, claiming to be the driver Mr. Callahan had sent. He had taken her $10 for what he called fuel money, and then somewhere on the long, winding road up into the foothills, he had stopped the wagon. Said he heard riders coming. Said she ought to step down a moment while he sorted them out. She had stepped down, she had waited, and after a quarter of an hour, standing alone in the cold, she had understood. The wagon was not coming back. The man had taken her money and abandoned her, and the road home was now 30 miles of forest and stone and gathering dark. She had walked until her boots were soaked through, and her legs trembled, and her lungs burned. The fog had rolled in like a gray ocean, swallowing the landmarks. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow looked like a wolf. Now she was starving, exhausted, and completely turned around. She heard a twig snap. It was loud like a gunshot in the quiet woods. Emmeline's head snapped up. Through the swirling mist, a figure emerged. He was huge. He wore a heavy coat made of buffalo hide, and a wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face. He looked like part of the mountain itself, wild and imposing. Fear, sharp and cold, spiked in her chest. She scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the rough bark of the tree. She tried to scream, but her throat was too dry, too tight with cold. She only managed a sharp, terrified gasp. Ezekiel froze. He heard the scramble of boots on dead leaves. He heard the sharp intake of breath. He was close, maybe 10 feet away. He did not move forward. He knew his size could be frightening. He planted his staff firmly in the dirt and stood still, letting the stranger see he was not attacking. He kept his head tilted slightly to the side, listening to the rapid, shallow breathing of the person in front of him. "The ground is too cold for sitting," Ezekiel said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air, but it was gentle, and the night is coming fast. Emmeline stared at him, trembling. He was not looking at her. His face was turned toward the wind. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but as he tilted his head, she caught a glimpse of them. They were milky and still. They did not track her movement when she shifted her weight. He was staring at the darkness, not at her. The knot of fear in her chest loosened just a little. A blind man was less of a danger than a hunter, but a blind man in this wilderness seemed like a ghost. "You," her voice cracked, "you cannot see me." Ezekiel smiled. It was a small, sad smile that softened his harsh, weathered features. "No, ma'am, I have not seen a thing in 10 years, but I can hear your teeth chattering from here. You are freezing." He slowly extended a hand. The palm was broad and calloused open and waiting. It hung in the air between them. It was an invitation, not a command. "The storm is going to break in less than an hour," Ezekiel said softly. "My cabin is half a mile from here. There is a fire, there is food. I can get you there, but you have to trust me." Emmeline looked at his outstretched hand. Then she looked back into the gray, swirling fog. The woods were getting darker by the second. If she stayed here, the cold would kill her before morning. She knew that deep in her gut. The cold did not care about her past or her mistakes. It only wanted to stop her heart. She pushed herself up from the tree roots. Her legs felt heavy and numb like blocks of wet wood. She stumbled forward. She reached out. Her fingers were trembling violently. She brushed against his sleeve. Ezekiel did not flinch. He waited until her small, cold hand gripped his forearm. He felt the ice in her touch. He frowned. She was colder than he had thought. "You are nearly frozen," he murmured. He did not ask permission. He simply unbuttoned his heavy buffalo skin coat. He slipped his arms out of it, revealing a thick wool shirt underneath. He draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. The heat from his body was still trapped in the fur. It enveloped her instantly. Emmeline gasped at the warmth. It felt like life returning to her body. The coat smelled of wood smoke and pine, and something else, something deeply human and clean, a scent that felt strangely safe. "Button it up," Ezekiel instructed gently. He tapped his staff against the ground, finding his footing. "Now hold on to my arm. Keep a tight grip. I will do the walking. But since I cannot see the low branches, you must be my eyes. If you see a hole or a rock, you tell me." "Can you do that?" Emmeline pulled the massive coat tighter around herself. She looked up at his face obscured by the hat brim. "Yes," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "I can do that." Ezekiel nodded. "Then let us go home. The mountain is not done with us yet." To know how this woman had come to be weeping alone in a freezing forest, 1,000 miles from anything she had ever known, you must travel back. Not far, just 3 weeks. To Boston, where the air smelled of coal smoke and harbor brine, and where a young woman named Emmeline Hayward had been counting the hours until her own murder. Her father had been a printer. James Hayward had run a small, honest shop on Tremont Street for 30 years. His hands always stained black with ink, his eyes always tired but kind behind round wire spectacles. He had taught Emmeline to read at 4. He had taught her to set type at 10. He had taught her arithmetic and ledgers and how to spot a forged signature at 20 paces. He had also taught her to love. He had been her whole world. Her mother had died of fever when Emmeline was just a baby, and James had raised her alone above the print shop, the smell of wet ink in her hair from the day she was born. 6 months ago, James Hayward had taken on a contract from a man named Silas Blackwood. Blackwood owned Blackwood Textile, the largest mill in the south end of Boston. He was 50 years old. He had cold eyes, the color of slate hair gone iron gray, and the kind of soft, expensive hands that had never done an honest day's work. He wanted James to print a run of school primers. The contract paid well, almost too well. James had taken the work. He needed the money. It was 3 weeks into the printing run that James had discovered the truth. The pages he was setting were not honest school primers. They were forgeries of a competing publisher's textbooks, printed cheaply and intended to be sold at half price under a stolen imprint. James was being made into a counterfeiter without his knowledge. When James confronted Blackwood, the older man had laughed. "You signed in the contract," printer Blackwood had said. "You signed it without asking questions because you needed the money. That makes you complicit. You are in this with me now. Finish the run, take your money, and shut your mouth." But James Hayward had something Blackwood had not counted on. James had a conscience, and James had something else. He had walked the floor of the Blackwood mill 3 times in the past month, delivering the proofs for the labels, and what he had seen there had broken his heart. He had seen children, little girls no older than 9 or 10 years old, working 12-hour shifts at the dye vats. He had seen a child named Nellie with thin shoulders and a cough that rattled like a tin cup full of pebbles. He had asked her how old she was, and she had said 9. He had asked her where her mother was, and she had said her mother had died last winter. He had asked her if she went to school, and she had laughed at him, a small, bitter laugh that was not the laugh of a child. 2 weeks later, Nellie's apron caught in the carding machine. She was pulled in before anyone could shut down the line. The child died on the factory floor. James Hayward began to gather evidence. Names, dates, shipping invoices, affidavits from former workers. He hid them in a place only he and Emmeline knew. And then he sent a letter to a journalist at the Boston Transcript. The letter never arrived. 2 days later, James Hayward was found dead in his print shop. The official cause was an accident with the press. He had been crushed. The police report said while operating the machine alone late at night, a tragic mishap. Emmeline knew it was no accident. The press her father had used was a Washington flatbed that required 2 people to operate safely. He would never have used it alone after midnight. He was too careful. He had been killed. But she had no proof, and the man who had killed him owned half the police force. 6 weeks after her father's funeral, Silas Blackwood had appeared at her boarding house. He had stood in the doorway of her tiny rented room, hat in his soft white hands, and he had told her that her father had left a debt. $400 owed to Blackwood Textile for advances against the printing contract. $400 Emmeline did not have. But Mr. Blackwood had a solution. Marriage. He was a widower. His first wife had died unexpectedly 2 years ago, drowned in her own bathtub under circumstances that had raised eyebrows but never charges. He needed a new wife. Emmeline was young, presentable, educated. The debt would be forgiven on the wedding day. He had smiled at her when he said it, the smile of a man who already owned her and was simply explaining the terms. Emmeline had asked for a week to consider. She did not need a week. She needed an escape. She had $50 hidden in the toe of an old shoe at the back of her closet savings she had squirreled away from her wages at the Blackwood Mill itself, where she had worked 12 hours a day at a loom for the past 2 years. $50 was not enough to disappear in Boston, but it was enough to buy a train ticket. It was enough to vanish. That same night, she had walked to the public library on Boylston Street, and she had picked up a copy of the Matrimonial News. It was a paper that connected lonely men in the West with women back east willing to come and marry them. She had read it under the gas lamp, her hands trembling. There were dozens of advertisements. Cattlemen looking for cooks, miners looking for housekeepers, lonely widowers looking for mothers for their children. Most of them made her stomach turn. But one stopped her cold. Honest man, mountains of Colorado seeks wife, health, honor, and a home assured. Replied to E.C. Silverpine. She read it 3 times. Honor, home. 3 words that her life had been missing for 6 months. She did not know who E.C. was. She did not know what he looked like. She did not know if he was kind or cruel, young or old, drunk or sober. But she knew this: he was 1,000 miles from Boston. and he was offering a home. She wrote her reply that night. She mailed it the next morning, and then she waited. His response came 2 weeks later. The handwriting was rough but careful. The letters formed slowly as if by a man unaccustomed to writing. The note was short. Come if you wish. Train ticket enclosed. Stage from Pine Hollow Station. Look for a man with a buffalo coat. We will see what God makes of it. Yours sincerely, Ezekiel Callahan. Enclosed in the envelope was a one-way train ticket from Boston to Pine Hollow, Colorado territory, and $40 in cash for traveling expenses. Emmeline had sat on the edge of her narrow bed and wept, not from fear, from a strange, terrible relief. She had packed a small valise, one change of clothes, a worn copy of Walt Whitman that had belonged to her father, the cameo brooch her mother had worn on her wedding day, the only piece of jewelry Emmeline owned. She had written a note on a piece of butcher paper and pinned it to the door of her boarding room. The note said, I cannot bear to live without him. Tell my landlord I am sorry for the rent. She had walked to the harbor that night and torn up half the note and let it scatter into the black water. She had wanted whoever found it to believe she had jumped. She had wanted Silas Blackwood to believe she was dead. She had been a fool. Silas Blackwood did not believe in suicide. Silas Blackwood believed in loose ends, and he had not become rich by leaving them untied. The day after Emmeline boarded her train, West Silas Blackwood walked into the dingy second-story office of a Pinkerton detective named Ruster Vance. Vance was a tall, hollow-cheeked man with the dead eyes of a stockyard butcher and a reputation for finding women who did not wish to be found. He had been dismissed from the Pinkerton agency 4 years prior for what the official files called excessive measures. Silas Blackwood paid Ruster Vance $200 in advance. He gave him a small tintype photograph of Emmeline Hayward. He gave him a description and a possible destination gleaned from a clerk at the railway station who remembered the pretty blonde girl who had purchased a ticket to a place called Pine Hollow. And then Silas Blackwood gave Ruster Vance one more instruction. I do not want her brought back, he said. I want her ended. $500 more on completion. There can be no witness. There can be no testimony. Do you understand me, Mr. Vance? Vance had understood perfectly. He had packed his valise that same evening. While Emmeline rode west on the rails, Ruster Vance was 3 days behind her, writing the same lines, asking the same questions. By the time her train pulled into Pine Hollow Station, he was less than a week behind. By the time she stepped down from that wagon onto the muddy mountain road, he was 3 days behind her. By the time she sobbed against the cedar tree and a blind giant in a buffalo coat heard her crying through the fog, Ruster Vance was disembarking from the very same train at Pine Hollow Station with a tintype photograph in his coat pocket and a hunting rifle in a long leather case. He paid the station master $5 for any information about the blonde girl. The station master remembered her. He remembered her beautiful blue eyes and her small valise and her nervous smile. He remembered the wagon driver who had picked her up, a man named Crawford, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, a known scoundrel. Ruster Vance smiled for the first time in 3 days. He thanked the station master. He hired a horse, and he began to ride. Emmeline did not know any of this. As she walked beside the blind man through the deepening fog with his huge warm coat draped over her shoulders and her small hand wrapped around his massive forearm, she only knew that she was alive, that for the first time in 6 months she was not alone. The forest was a maze of gray shadows to Emmeline. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Rockies, the light failed rapidly, turning the trees into looming skeletons. She gripped Ezekiel's arm with white-knuckled intensity. To her, every step was a gamble. She could not tell if the ground was solid or if it would give way to a drop. But to Ezekiel, the path was clear. He did not walk with the hesitant shuffle of a man in the dark. He walked with a rhythmic, rolling stride. His boots struck the earth with purpose. We are close to the ridge, Ezekiel said, his voice cutting through the whistling wind. Emmeline looked around wildly. How can you know that? It all looks the same. Ezekiel tapped his staff against the trunk of a massive tree as they passed. Do you hear that? The wind sounds different here. Down in the valley, the wind sighs through the willows. Up here, it roars through the pines. The needles are stiffer. The sound is sharper. We are gaining elevation. Emmeline listened. He was right. The sound above them had changed from a soft rustle to a high, lonely hiss. It was a map written in the air, one she had never bothered to read. She tried to make herself useful, scanning the ground for roots and rocks. "Big rock on the left," she called out. "I know," Ezekiel replied calmly. "The echo of my cane changes when I get near it. The air feels denser." Emmeline felt a flush of embarrassment. She was supposed to be helping him, yet he seemed to be the one guiding her through a world she could see and he could not. She tried to hurry to prove she could lead. She saw a flat patch of leaves ahead and stepped out confidently, pulling slightly on his arm. "Wait," Ezekiel warned, but it was too late. Emmeline's boot hit the leaves and the ground underneath was not solid. It was slick, wet clay hidden by the foliage. Her feet went out from under her. She gave a sharp cry as she fell backward. She did not hit the ground. Ezekiel's hands shot out with terrifying speed. He caught her by the elbow, his grip iron strong. He hauled her back onto her feet before she could hit the mud. "Slow down," he said, not unkindly. He tapped the ground where she had slipped. It made a squelching sound. Leaves do not crunch like that unless they are floating on mud. "You have to listen to the earth, ma'am. Your eyes will lie to you in this light. But the ground never lies." Emmeline stood trembling, breathless, held upright by the blind man. She realized then that she had been looking at the world, but Ezekiel was the only one truly paying attention to it. "I am sorry," she stammered. "Do not be sorry," Ezekiel said, adjusting his grip on his staff. "Just be careful. Now step where I step. Feel the ground before you trust it." The path narrowed. The comforting crunch of frozen earth gave way to a silence that even unnerved Ezekiel. He stopped abruptly, his staff hitting something hard and resonant with a hollow thud instead of the soft tamp of dirt. Emmeline bumped into his back, startled. "Why did we stop?" she whispered, peering over his shoulder. "The path is gone," Ezekiel said grimly. He swept his staff back and forth in a wide arc. It met resistance everywhere. "A tree has come down, a big one. It must have fallen in the last storm." Emmeline stepped around him. A massive ponderosa pine, its trunk as thick as a barrel, lay directly across their trail. Its branches were a tangled mess of broken limbs and sharp needles, creating a wall of wood and debris. To the left was a steep, rocky embankment. To the right, a drop-off into the darkening ravine. There was no way around. They had to go over. Ezekiel reached out his hand, finding the rough scaling bark. He frowned. He could feel the wood, but he could not feel the danger. Was the trunk rotted soft or solid? Were there jagged branches pointing straight at his face? For the first time, he hesitated. "I cannot see the branches," he admitted, his voice low. "If I climb blind, I might take a branch to the face or slip on loose bark. I need you now, ma'am. I need your eyes." Emmeline swallowed hard. She stepped closer to the blockade. She looked at the twisted limbs, then back at Ezekiel's waiting face. "It looks solid in the middle," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But it is high, too high to step over, and there are broken branches sticking out on the left side." "Good," Ezekiel nodded. "Come here." He turned his back to the log and held out his hands, interlacing his fingers to form a cup. "Step into my hands. I will lift you up. Once you are on the trunk, you must guide me. You must place my hands where the wood is safe." Emmeline placed her boot in his hands. Ezekiel grunted, lifting her with a surge of effortless power that surprised her. He hoisted her up until she scrambled onto the rough bark of the fallen tree. She sat there perched on the timber, looking down at him. Ezekiel stood below, waiting in the dark. He raised his right hand, palm open, searching the air. "Where do I hold?" he asked. Emmeline reached down. She took his large, scarred hand in hers. The skin was rough, but his touch was gentle. She guided his hand away from a sharp, broken knot and placed it firmly on a smooth section of the trunk. "Here," she said. It is smooth here. Pull yourself up. Ezekiel trusted her. He gripped the wood where she had guided him. He hauled himself up, his muscles straining against the weight of his heavy clothing. Emmeline grabbed his other arm, pulling with all your strength, anchoring him. For a moment they were a single unit, her eyes scanning the wood for danger, his strength pulling them both forward. He swung his leg over, finding purchase next to her. They sat side by side on the fallen giant, breathing heavily in the cold air. Ezekiel turned his face toward her. He did not see her, but he reached out and briefly touched her shoulder. "You have good eyes," he said softly. Something warm stirred in Emmeline's chest, a small thing. But on a night this cold, even a small warmth was enough. The final mile was a battle against the wind. The storm had finally broken, sending hard, icy pellets of snow stinging against their faces. Emmeline kept her head down, following the heavy, rhythmic thud of Ezekiel's boots. She was exhausted. Her legs felt like lead weights, and the cold had seeped through the layers of the buffalo coat, settling deep in her chest. Just when she thought she could not take another step, Ezekiel stopped. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring slightly. "We are here," he said. Emmeline squinted through the driving snow. Ahead, nestled between two massive boulders that shielded it from the worst of the gale, stood a cabin. It was low and sturdy, built from logs as thick as a man's waist. A thin wisp of smoke struggled from the stone chimney, promising the last embers of a dying fire. A larger structure stood behind it, a barn with a hayloft, and beyond that, another, smaller building, a bunkhouse perhaps. Ezekiel did not fumble for the latch. His hand went directly to the iron handle. He pushed the heavy oak door open, and a scent rushed out to meet them. A rich, earthy perfume of cedar and dried sage and old leather and wood smoke. To Emmeline, it was the sweetest smell she had ever known. "Get in," Ezekiel urged, ushering her past him. "Quickly, do not let the heat out." Emmeline stumbled across the threshold. Ezekiel followed, closing the heavy door firmly behind them and dropping a thick wooden bar into place. The silence was instant. The howling wind was reduced to a dull, distant moan. The cabin was dark, illuminated only by the faint orange glow of coals in the hearth. Emmeline shivered her teeth, chattering loudly in the quiet room. Ezekiel moved past her. Inside these walls, he did not use his staff. He leaned it against the doorframe and moved with a fluid, ghostly grace. He knew exactly where the floorboards creaked. He knew exactly how many steps it was to the fireplace. He knelt before the hearth. Emmeline watched as his large hands moved with delicate precision. He found the kindling box by touch, selecting 3 small sticks. He placed them over the coals, then blew gently. The glow brightened. A small flame licked up, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. He added larger logs, one by one, building the fire not by sight, but by the sound of the wood settling and the heat on his face. "There is a kerosene lamp on the table to your left," Ezekiel said, not turning around, "and a box of matches beside it. I have no need for it, but you will want the light." Emmeline found the lamp. Her shaking hand struck a match, and soft yellow light flooded the room. She looked around. The cabin was immaculate. There was no clutter, no mess. Every tool, every pot, every jar on the shelf was aligned perfectly straight. It was a world of absolute order, designed by a man who could not afford to lose anything. Then she heard horses, 2 of them, coming hard up the trail outside. A voice shouted in the storm, "Zeke! Zeke, are you there?" 2 more men burst through the door behind her, stamping snow from their boots, breathing hard from the cold ride. Emmeline turned startled, the lamp trembling in her hand. The first was nearly as tall as Ezekiel, but leaner, harder, with the same chestnut brown hair and the same striking amber eyes. He carried a Winchester rifle across his shoulder, and his face was set in a hard scowl. The second was younger and slightly shorter, with a more open face and a quick smile that died the moment he saw her standing there. Zeke, the older of the 2, set his voice tight. "We rode the road from Pine Hollow. The stage came in yesterday morning. Driver said he picked up a young woman and lost her on the road. Crawford, that same drunk who tried to cheat us last spring, we have been searching since dawn." The younger man stared at Emmeline. His eyes traveled over her travel-stained dress, her tangled blonde hair, her exhausted face. The wind died in the room. Zeke, the younger man, said softly, "The girl, the bride, the one I wrote for." Ezekiel had been kneeling at the hearth. He went very still. "What did you say, Jedediah?" he asked. The younger man, Jedediah, swallowed hard. "Brother, I have to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago. I wrote a letter. I placed an advertisement in the matrimonial news in Boston. Under your name. I wrote that you were looking for a wife," a young woman wrote back. I wrote her again. I sent her a train ticket. She was supposed to arrive yesterday on the Pine Hollow stage. We came here to tell you and to find her. Oh. Ezekiel stood up slowly from the hearth. The fire crackled behind him, casting a long shadow that reached across the cabin floor. "You did what?" The older brother Caleb stepped forward. "We have been arguing about this for 3 days, Zeke. Jed thought he was helping. He thought after that fever last month when we almost lost you that you needed someone. He is wrong. He was wrong. But he wrote the letter and the woman is real. And now she is somewhere on this mountain." Caleb's eyes shifted to Emmeline Tayershawman. They narrowed. "What is your name, ma'am?" Emmeline felt the lamp shake harder in her hand. She set it carefully on the table. She drew herself up to her full small height. Her voice when it came was steadier than she expected. "My name," she said, "is Emmeline Hayward. I came from Boston. I came to marry Ezekiel Callahan." The silence in the cabin was absolute. The fire popped. The wind groaned against the heavy log walls. Ezekiel turned his face slowly toward her. His sightless amber eyes did not find her, but his head tilted in that way she was already coming to know the way of a man hearing every nuance of every breath in the room. "Then I suppose," he said quietly, "that I have already met you, Miss Hayward." He took a long, slow breath. "Sit down by the fire. Get warm." Caleb seated the horses. "Jedediah, you and I are going to have a very long conversation tomorrow morning, you and me alone, about the difference between helping a man and lying to him. But not tonight. Tonight this woman has walked through a storm and lost $10 to a thief and very nearly frozen to death. Tonight she eats. Tonight she sleeps. We will sort the rest of it in the morning." Emmeline sank onto the bearskin rug in front of the hearth. The heat from the now blazing fire washed over her face, her hands, her aching legs. She closed her eyes for just a moment. She did not see Caleb give her one last hard, searching look before he slipped back out into the storm to tend the horses. She did not see Jedediah's face go pale as he watched his older brother across the fire-lit room. She did not see Ezekiel's hands tremble just slightly as he reached for the cast-iron pot hanging beside the hearth. She only knew that for the first time in 6 months she was warm. She was sheltered. She was no longer running. She did not know that 30 miles down the mountain in the only inn at Pine Hollow, a tall, hollow-cheeked man with dead eyes was unpacking a hunting rifle from a long leather case. She did not know that he had paid the innkeeper $4 for a bed and another $2 for the name of every homesteader within 50 miles whose name began with the letter C. She did not know that he had circled 3 names on his list: Carver, Coleman, Callahan. Outside the cabin, the snow began to fall harder. The first heavy snow of the long Colorado winter. The kind of snow that closes the passes and locks the mountain doors and decides who lives and who does not. Inside the cabin, a blind man stirred a pot of stew over a crackling fire and listened to a young woman's breathing, slow, slow, slow towards sleep. She had until morning to decide. Ride back down the mountain to a life with nothing waiting for her, or stay here in this cabin with 3 brothers she did not know and a promise that one of them had not even made. Stay with a blind man who had heard her crying through a storm. Stay in a place where the only thing she owned were the cameo at her throat and the buffalo coat on her shoulders and the slow returning warmth in her frozen bones. She did not know what she would choose. But the mountain knew. The mountain had already chosen for her. and the wind outside was carrying the sound of a man named Ruster Vance loading rifle cartridges by lamplight in a town 30 miles below, and that wind was rising fast. Winter had come to the Callahan Ridge, and the worst of it by far was still to come. Morning came slow and gray to the Callahan Ridge. Emmeline woke not knowing where she was. For one long, terrified second, she believed she was still in her boarding room in Boston, that the past 3 weeks had been only a dream, that Silas Blackwood would be at her door before noon. Then she smelled the wood smoke. She felt a thick wool blanket heavy across her shoulders. She heard the slow, patient sound of a man breathing in a chair beside the hearth. She opened her eyes. Ezekiel Callahan sat in the rocking chair, his head tilted back against the wood, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. He had not slept in his own bed. He had stayed in the main room all night, watching over her without watching at all. The fire had burned down to red coals. The first thin light of dawn was creeping through the small window over the kitchen counter. Emmeline pushed herself up on her elbow. The blanket slid down her shoulder. Ezekiel stirred at the sound. His head turned toward her. His sightless eyes did not find her, but every other part of him already knew exactly where she was. "You slept 12 hours, he said quietly. "The storm broke around 3. The brothers are out checking the cattle. You are safe." "Thank you," she whispered. She did not know what else to say. She did not know how to thank a man for the act of simply staying in a room. But to her, after 6 months of locked doors and Silas Blackwood's slate-gray eyes, this man sleeping upright in a chair to guard her was the kindest act she had ever witnessed. Ezekiel sat forward. "There is coffee, there is biscuit and salt pork. Eat first, then we will talk about what comes next." Emmeline rose. The buffalo coat was draped over a peg by the door. Her boots stood beneath it, the wet leather already drying in the heat of the cabin. She moved to the table. She ate. She drank the coffee. It was strong and bitter, and the best thing she had tasted in years. Ezekiel did not eat. He sat in the rocking chair listening to her chew. After a long time he spoke. "I am going to be plain with you, Miss Hayward. Plainness is the only honest way I know to talk. My brother Jedediah wrote that letter without my knowledge or permission. I did not advertise for a wife. I would not have advertised for a wife. I am 31 years old. I have been blind for 10 of those years, the better part of a third of my life. I run 200 head of cattle on a mountain that takes a strong man to walk in good weather. I have not asked any woman to share that kind of life because I do not believe it would be fair to ask it." He paused. The rocking chair creaked once beneath him. "But you are here, and you came in good faith. And the road back down the mountain in winter is not a road I will send a woman to ride alone. So I am offering you this. You will stay through the winter. You will have the bedroom that was my mother's. I will sleep in the room that was my father's. My brothers stay in the bunkhouse out back. There is no obligation between us beyond simple decency. You cook if you wish to cook. I will hunt and chop wood and tend the herd. You read, you walk the porch, you sleep, you do as you please." He drew a slow breath. "Come spring, the pass is open. If you wish to leave, I will give you the train fare back to Boston or the train fare to anywhere else you choose. If you wish to stay, then we will talk about staying. Until then, there are no questions and no demands. Is that arrangement acceptable to you, Miss Hayward?" Emmeline set her coffee cup down. Her hand was trembling, but not from fear this time, from something closer to grief, because no man in Boston had ever spoken to her with this kind of careful gentleness. No man had ever given her the simple courtesy of choosing. "It is more than acceptable," she said quietly. "Mr. Callahan, please call me Emmeline." Ezekiel nodded once. "Then call me Zeke. Mr. Callahan was my father, and he is buried in a hole in the ground in Denver, and I do not care to be reminded of him every time you address me." Caleb came in then, stamping snow from his boots, his Winchester slung across his back. His amber eyes found Emmeline at the table. He did not smile. He did not greet her. He walked past her to the kitchen counter and poured himself a cup of coffee and drank it standing. "There is one more rule," Caleb said, his voice flat. I do not know who you are, Miss Hayward. Jed wrote a letter to a name in a newspaper, and you are the answer that arrived. You may be exactly who you say you are. You may not. Time will tell us. But while you are here, you do not move anything in this cabin, not a lamp, not a salt cellar, not a chair, not a kettle. My brother lives in a world he memorized inch by inch over 10 years. You move a coffee tin 2 feet to the left, and he reaches for it and finds nothing, and he loses his footing, and he falls down those porch steps, and he breaks his neck. Do you understand me? I understand, Emmeline said. I am serious as a grate, Caleb said. I know you are. He held her gaze for one more long second. Then he gave a small, grudging nod and walked out the back door, his coffee in his hand, the door closing hard behind him. Ezekiel had not moved from the rocking chair. After a moment, he tilted his head toward the back door. He is not a cruel man, Zeke said softly. He is just my brother. And brothers worry, I know, Emmeline said. He is not wrong to worry. Zeke smiled at that. A small smile. A real one. Winter always ends, he said. We will get through this winter. You will get through this winter. The mountain is hard, but it is not unkind. Not to those who learn to listen. That first week passed in a quiet that Emmeline did not know she had been starving for. Boston had been noise. Boston had been the rattle of machinery and the shouts of the streets in the boom of the harbor cannon at sunset and the constant clang of a city pretending to be alive. The Callahan Ridge was none of those things. The Callahan Ridge was wind through pines, the slow knock of a horse hoof on a frozen yard, the hiss of bacon in a cast iron pan, the slide of a bolt in a Winchester being cleaned at the kitchen table. She learned the cabin first. 30 feet by 24, the walls stacked from cedar logs as thick as a barrel, the great stone hearth in the center of the longest wall. The grandfather clock that Thomas Callahan had built with his own hands in the summer of 1862. The cast iron stove, the pantry stocked deep with smoked elk and salted bacon and sacks of flour and dried apples and cans of peaches Caleb had hauled up from Silver Pine in October. She learned the rules. Every cup, every spoon, every jar of preserves had its exact place. The salt was 6 inches from the corner of the counter. The flour was on the right-hand side of the second shelf. The matches were in a small tin nailed to the post beside the hearth. The kerosene lamp lived 3 steps from the door. She watched Zeke move through the room, and she understood what Caleb had warned her about. The cabin was a map drawn in the bones of a man who had memorized every inch of it because his life depended on it. She did not move a single thing. She learned the brothers. Caleb rose at 4 in the morning and rode out to break the ice on the cattle troughs before the herd could drink. He came back at dusk with his face raw from the wind and his rifle across his shoulder and a brace of grouse for the pot. He spoke to Emmeline only when necessary. He watched her with cold, amber eyes that gave away nothing. But she noticed that he always set the bar across the cabin door himself at night, and he always checked the bar twice. Jedediah was the youngest, 25 years old, with hands that worked wood the way other men worked clay. He had built every chair in the cabin. He had carved the small, whittled animals that lined the mantel, a bear, a wolf, a leaping trout. He sang while he worked old songs Emmeline did not know, Shenandoah and Red River Valley and Oh Susanna, his voice low and warm as a fire on a cold night. He was the brother who had written the letter. He was the brother who had brought her here. And he was the brother who could not look his older brother in the face without flinching for the first 3 days after her arrival. Zeke was the man she could not stop watching. He moved through his cabin like a king through a kingdom only he knew. He never bumped a corner. He never reached for something and found empty air. He milked the goat at dawn, by sound his hands finding the teats, by feel the milk hissing into the wooden bucket between his boots. He chopped wood by the grain of the timber, his thumb reading every log before the axe came down, and not once did he miss his strike. He cleaned his rifle by touch, every part of the mechanism familiar in his calloused hands. And he listened. He listened to everything. He listened to the wind and the creak and the cattle bawling on the far slope. He listened to the door hinge and the kettle and the slow tick of the grandfather clock. He listened to her breathing, to her footsteps, to the small noises she made when she thought no one could hear her, the soft sighs she let out when she opened the wood stove door, the hum she made under her breath when she stirred a pot. By the fourth day, he could find her in the cabin without turning his head. She did not know what to make of any of it. She had never been seen this clearly before. Not by a sighted man, not by anyone. The first real test came on the morning of the eighth day. Emmeline had been working through the family ledger book at the kitchen table. Jedediah had brought it out the night before, sheepish and apologetic, asking if she might know how to read the figures. He could read words well enough, he had said, but numbers ran in his head like spooked horses. Caleb knew the numbers but had no patience for the writing. Zeke could not read them at all anymore. The book had not been balanced in 2 years. She had opened the leather-bound volume, and within an hour she had found something that made her stomach turn cold. She read the columns 3 times to be sure. Then she rose, crossed the cabin, and stepped out the back door into the bright cold afternoon. Caleb was at the chopping block. He had taken off his coat and rolled his sleeves to the elbows. Despite the cold, his arms steaming in the icy air, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He saw her coming and his jaw tightened, but he did not stop the axe. He brought it down one more time, splitting a heavy round of pine clean in 2. Then he set the axe head against the block and turned to face her. "What is it, Miss Hayward? May I show you something in the ledger?" He looked at her a long moment. Then he gave a single short nod and followed her back inside. She had laid the book open on the kitchen table. She had turned it so that he could read it. She had not moved a single object on the counter. "You sell beef twice a year," she said. "Once in the spring and once in the fall. You drive the herd down to Silver Pine and you sell to a man named Henry Bowman." Caleb stood with his arms crossed. "That is correct. I have looked at the prices Bowman has paid you for the last 3 years, and I have compared them to the freight prices that Mr. Callahan, your father, was getting in the years before. The difference is here, here, and here." She turned the book and ran her finger down the columns. "Bowman is paying you between $3.50 and $4 per head, less than your father was getting from the same buyer. Now, beef prices have fallen across the territory in the past 5 years. I read the Denver papers in Boston before I came. So some of that drop is the market, but not all of it. By my figures, Mr. Bowman has cheated you out of approximately $620 over the last 3 sales, possibly more if I had earlier records to compare." Caleb did not move. He stared at the page. His eyes traveled the columns. He did the arithmetic in his head twice. She watched him do it. She watched his jaw work. When he spoke at last, his voice was very quiet. $600 at least. He stood in silence for a long time. Then he sat down at the kitchen table very slowly, like a man whose knees had gone out from under him. He put his hands flat on the open ledger. He stared at the figures. "I have known Henry Bowman for 15 years, he said softly. "I sat at his table at Christmas dinner the year my mother died. I helped him build the addition on his store. I trusted that man." "I am sorry," Emmeline said. Caleb shook his head. Slow, he was not shaking it at her. "I do not have the head for figures," he said. "Jed does not have the head for figures. Zeke could do this in his sleep before. After the blast, he could not read the page anymore, and we were all too proud and too stupid to ask anybody for help. Bowman knew that. He counted on it. He looked up at her. His amber eyes were not cold anymore. They were furious, but the fury was not at her. "You did this in less than an hour. I was raised in a print shop. My father taught me ledgers before he taught me poetry." He stood up. He walked to the door. He opened it and called out into the yard, "Zeke, Jed, get in here." That night, the brothers held a council at the kitchen table. Emmeline sat at one end, the ledger open before her, explaining her findings a second time and a third. Zeke sat with his head bowed, his calloused hands clasped before him on the table, listening to every figure she read out, asking her to repeat the differences slowly. $620, he said quietly. At least, she said. There may be more in the years before that, but I have no records to compare. Zeke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Jedediah, in the morning you saddle the gray mare. You ride down to Silver Pine. You go to the bank, not to Bowman. You speak to Mr. Hatfield, the manager. You tell him I want the records of every Callahan sale Bowman has filed with the bank for the last 6 years. You bring those papers back to me. We are going to find out exactly how deep this hole runs. And then we are going to have a conversation with Mr. Henry Bowman that he will not soon forget. Yes, brother, Jedediah said. Zeke turned his face slowly toward Emmeline. His blind eyes did not find her, but his head tilted with that listening attention she had come to know. Miss Hayward, Emmeline, I will not forget that you did this. It was nothing, she said. It was not nothing, Zeke said quietly. It was an honest day's work for a man who could not see his own pocket being picked. That is a debt I will not forget. Caleb said nothing. But when Emmeline rose later to clear the table, he stood up and took the dishes from her hands and carried them to the wash basin himself. He had never done that before. It was the closest he could come to an apology. She understood it perfectly. The lessons began the next morning. She did not ask for them. She did not even know what they were at first. Zeke had finished his coffee and stood at the back door pulling on his coat, and he had said over his shoulder in the same flat voice he used to speak about the weather, Miss Hayward, if you would care to stand on the porch a few minutes, I would like to show you something. She followed him out into the cold. The sun was just over the eastern peaks, throwing long blue shadows across the snow. The whole world was painfully bright. Zeke stood at the porch rail with his hat tilted back, his face turned toward the trees. Close your eyes, he said. She closed her eyes. Now tell me what you hear. She listened. At first there was nothing, just the cold air on her face and the faint smell of wood smoke from the chimney. Then slowly the world began to fill in. Ice melting, she said. From the eaves, drip, drip, drip. Good, a bird, far off. To the east, a raven, Zeke said, calling its mate from the high pines. Keep going, wind, she said, coming up the slope from the south, warmer than it was yesterday. Yes, the south wind brings a thaw, but not for long. There will be more snow by Friday. She opened her eyes. He was smiling slightly. Not at her, just at the morning. Every sound is a picture, Zeke said. For 10 years I thought the world had ended, but it had only changed languages. I had to learn it again from the beginning, the way a child learns to talk. I had to teach myself that a north wind is colder than a south wind, and that the creek runs different in the spring than in the fall, and that a horse breathes different when it is frightened than when it is calm. I had to learn the whole world over again with my ears and my hands and my skin. He turned his face toward her. The light caught his amber eyes, and for a moment in that frozen blue light, he looked younger than his years. He looked like a man she might have known a long time ago before the blast, before the dark. I will be your eyes if you will be my ears, he said softly. Will you let me teach you what I know? She could not speak for a moment. She only nodded. Then she remembered he could not see the nod, and she said yes. Yes, please. The lessons did not end on the porch. They began to weave through everything. While she kneaded bread at the counter, he stood beside her and named the sounds outside. The creak of the barn door meant Jedediah was bringing in hay. The double rifle crack from the eastern slope meant Caleb had taken a deer. The soft clop of 3 hooves followed by a dragging fourth meant the sorrel mare was favoring her right foreleg again, and he would need to look at her. While she swept the cabin floor, he taught her the names of the wood, the cedar logs of the walls, the pine of the floorboards, the oak of the table, the hickory of his staff. He let her run her fingers along each grain. He said the cedar smells like nothing else on this mountain. The pine bleeds sap like a man bleeds blood. The oak is heavier than it has any right to be. The hickory will not break for any blow you can give it. These are the woods of a home, Emmeline. Learn them. And on the third evening of the lessons, he taught her the harmonica. He produced it from the breast pocket of his shirt, where he had carried it for 10 years. A small tarnished silver harmonica, the brass underneath worn smooth from a decade of his thumb. I cannot read music anymore, he said, but I can play this. My father taught me the night before the blast. It was the last thing he ever taught me with his own hands. He sat on the long bench by the hearth. He patted the seat beside him. She came and sat. The fire was low. The cabin was quiet. Caleb was out at the stable. Jedediah had gone to bed. Zeke held the harmonica in his hands. Then very gently he placed it in hers. He set his own large, calloused hands over hers, his thumbs guiding her thumbs to the right placement on the brass. Hold it like this, he said. Now bring it up to your mouth, lips relaxed. Do not pucker. She did. His hands stayed over hers. She could feel the heat of him through the wool of his sleeve, the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest behind her shoulder. Her own breath was suddenly very loud in her ears. Now breathe in, he said softly. She breathed in. A reedy, thin note came out broken and pitiful. She laughed. He laughed too, a low, rusty sound, as though he had not used that laugh in years and was surprised to find it still worked. Try again, he said. She tried again. The note came clearer, a single round, mournful tone. The fire crackled, the wind sighed against the window. Zeke did not move his hands from hers. He sat very still. After a moment, he said very quietly, "That is the first time I have laughed like that in 10 years, Emmeline." She did not answer. She did not trust her voice. She let her head tilt just a little, and her temple came to rest against his shoulder. He went very still. He did not move his head. He did not move his hands. He only stopped breathing for one long second. Then he resumed breathing, and he did not move away. They sat like that for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The fire burned down. Somewhere in the next room, the grandfather clock chimed 9. Finally, Zeke spoke. His voice was rough. "I do not know what is happening to me, Emmeline." She did not answer at first. Then she said very softly, "I do not know either." He nodded once. He did not move. "We will take it slow," he said. "I am a man who has not been touched by anyone except my brothers in 10 years. You are a woman who has come a long way through hard country to a place she never expected to land. We will take it slow. I cannot promise much in this world, but I can promise you that." "Take it slow," she whispered. "Yes, that." He gave her hands one small squeeze, and then he released them and he stood up. He crossed the cabin. He paused at the door of his bedroom, his hand on the iron latch. "Sleep well, Emmeline." "Good night, Zeke." The door clicked softly shut behind him. She sat by the fire for a long time after that. She did not cry. She had cried enough for a lifetime. She just sat holding the harmonica, feeling the warmth of his hands still on hers, listening to the wind outside, thinking that she had run 1,000 miles to the end of the world, and she had landed exactly where she had needed to land. Her happiness lasted 4 days. The fight came on the morning of the 5th. It was a small thing. It is always a small thing with people who do not know yet how to love each other. A jar of dried sage had been sitting on the second shelf 3 inches from the corner, where it had sat for 10 years. Emmeline had been making a stew. She had wanted to add a pinch. The jar had been too close to the edge for her comfort. She had picked it up and moved it 3 inches to the left deeper onto the shelf where she thought it would be safer. She had told herself she would put it back. She had forgotten. Zeke came in from the barn that afternoon. He hung his coat. He went to the shelf. His hand reached for the part of Sage Automatic. The way a man reaches for a button, he has buttoned 10,000 times. His hand closed on empty air. He flinched. He stepped forward to compensate. His hip struck the corner of the shelf. The shelf jolted. A glass jar of preserves 3 above the sage tipped. It fell. It struck the wood plank floor and shattered. Glass shards and bright red apple jam exploded across the floorboards. Zeke jerked back. His boot came down on glass. He felt it crunch. He went very still. Emmeline was at the stove. She froze. What just happened? Zeke said. His voice was very quiet, very tight. She began. She could not finish. I moved a jar. The sage. I was going to put it back. I forgot. He did not turn his head. He spoke to the air in front of him. Do not move. There is glass on the floor. I cannot see where. Do not move from where you are standing. She did not move. She could not move. She was frozen at the stove, the wooden spoon trembling in her hand. He bent down very slowly. He reached for the floor with his bare hand. His fingers brushed glass. He found the larger pieces by feel. He picked them up one at a time and set them on the counter. When he had cleared a small path, he straightened. He stood there in the wreckage of the broken jar. His hand was bleeding. A thin line of red ran from his palm, down his wrist, and dripped onto the floorboards. His voice, when it came, was rougher than she had ever heard it. I told you not to move anything. Caleb told you not to move anything. The first day, the first hour, I told you what would happen. I am sorry, she whispered. In this house, he said, a salt cellar moved is a man who eats his stew unsalted. A sage jar moved is a shelf that bruises my hip. But it could have been the kerosene gone. It could have been the matches. It could have been the rifle on the wall by the door. Do you understand? Do you understand what could happen if you move the wrong thing? I am sorry, she said again. Her voice broke. Tears filled her eyes, hot and humiliating. I only wanted to help. I always only want to help. And nothing I do is right. Not one thing. Not one. She set the spoon down on the stove. She crossed the cabin. She did not run. She walked very fast past him, past the broken glass, past the dripping blood from his hand, out the back door, into the cold yard, past the chopping block into the barn. She climbed into the empty stall beside the old gray mare named Daisy. She sat down on the straw. She pressed her face against the warm, soft side of the horse, and she wept. She did not know how long she had been weeping when she heard the barn door creak. She did not look up. Boots on hay, slow, patient, the tap of a hickory staff against the floorboards. He had come without it for once and gone back for it, or he had had it the whole time. He stopped outside the stall. May I come in? She did not answer. She did not trust her voice. He stayed outside the stall. He spoke through the wood. Emmeline, I was not angry with you. I was angry with myself. She lifted her head. Her face was streaked. Daisy's flank was wet where her tears had fallen. I was angry that I could not be a normal man for you. I was angry that you cannot move a jar in your own kitchen because of me. I was angry that I am the kind of man whose home becomes a prison for the woman in it. And I pushed all of that anger at you, and you did not deserve any of it. Not 1 ounce. Her breath caught. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. You do not have to be a normal man, Zeke, she said. Her voice was thin. You only have to be yourself. That is all I want. He was silent for a long time. Then he opened the stall gate. He stepped inside. He sat down on the straw beside her, his back against the rough wood of the stall wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. His hand was still bleeding. He had wrapped it in his bandana. I am not good at this, he said quietly. I have not had to be good at this in a long time. I am not good at it either, she said. He let out a long, slow breath. They sat in the warm dark of the barn. Daisy nickered softly above them. Somewhere outside, Caleb was hammering at a fence post. Somewhere further away, Jedediah was singing. After a long while, Zeke spoke. Emmeline, Ain, do not leave us. Whatever else happens, do not leave us this winter. I am asking you that, as a man and not as anything else. She turned her head against the wall and looked at him in the half-dark. His head was tilted back against the wood. His eyes were closed. The lines around his mouth were soft. I will not leave, she whispered. I have nowhere to go that I want to go. I have only here. He nodded once. He did not open his eyes. Then we will get through this, he said. Winter always ends. Winter always ends, she repeated. That night, she did not bolt the door of her bedroom. It was the first night since she had arrived that she did not. She did not know what it meant. She thought maybe he would understand. In the morning when she came out for breakfast, he was standing at the kitchen counter. He had cleaned the floor in the night. The broken glass was gone. The sage jar was back exactly where it had always been, 3 inches from the corner of the second shelf. Caleb was at the table drinking coffee. Jedediah was lacing his boots by the door. The cabin was quiet and warm. Zeke turned his face towards her when she stepped into the room. He did not smile, but he tilted his head just slightly in the way she had come to know, meant that he had heard her, that he had been waiting for her, that her arrival in a room was something he registered, the way other men registered the rising of the sun. Good morning, Emmeline. Good morning, Zeke. That should have been the beginning of the rest of it. The slow, gentle thaw, the deepening trust, the quiet building of a thing neither of them had quite the courage yet to name. It was not. That afternoon, Caleb rode back from Silver Pine. He came in through the cabin door without knocking, which he never did. His coat was unbuttoned despite the cold. His hat was pushed back on his head. His amber eyes were hard and very awake. A man rode into Silver Pine 3 days ago, he said. Tall, hollow-cheeked, New York accent. He has been asking the postmaster, the stable master, and every drunk in the saloon if anyone has seen a young blonde woman from Boston. He has been paying for information. $5 apiece. Emmeline went white. She felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Caleb watched her face. His jaw tightened. He told the stable master his name is Ruster Vance. He told the saloon keeper he is the brother of a woman who has gone missing from her family. He told the postmaster he is a private detective from the Pinkerton agency. 3 different stories to 3 different men, and he showed all 3 of them a photograph. Caleb pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and laid it on the table. There on the second page of the Silver Pine Gazette, in the public notices column, was a small printed advertisement. Reward, $200 gold, for information leading to the whereabouts of Miss Emmeline Hayward, age 23, fair-haired, blue-eyed. Last seen Boston, Massachusetts. Family seeking news of her welfare. Apply Mr. R. Vance, Silver Pine House Hotel. Emmeline reached out and gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. He is here, she whispered. Zeke was already on his feet. He had heard every word. His blind face was hard now. The gentleness gone, the mountain man underneath rising up. Caleb, how far behind us is he? He has been in Silver Pine 3 days. He knows you live up here. He knows there are 3 of us. He knows the road. He will be on it tomorrow morning. He will not come alone. Men like him never come alone. Then we have until tonight to plan, Zeke said. He turned his face toward Emmeline. His voice was iron. You said his name was Vance. Yes, and the man who sent him, Silas Blackwood, of Boston, the man who killed my father. Zeke nodded once, slow, final. Then this is no longer about a runaway bride, he said. This is about a man who came onto my mountain to kill the woman my brother promised would have a home with me. And that Miss Hayward is something I take a great deal of personal interest in. The wind outside was rising again. The second storm of the winter was coming on. And somewhere 30 miles below, a tall, hollow-cheeked man was tightening the cinch on a saddle and loading 2 extra rifles into a pack and hiring 2 men in the back room of a saloon for $50 apiece. He would be on the trail before dawn. And on the Callahan Ridge, a blind man and his 2 brothers and a young woman from Boston sat down at a long oak table by a fire, and they began to plan how they would survive the night that was coming. The plan came together at the long oak table by the dying afternoon light. Zeke sat at the head, his hands clasped before him. His face turned slightly toward each speaker as they spoke. Caleb stood pacing the way he always paced when his mind was working. Jedediah sat across from Emmeline, his usually warm face gone tight and focused. Emmeline herself sat with her hands folded in her lap, because if she did not fold them, they would shake. Caleb spoke first. He spoke as he paced. A man like Ruster Vance does not ride alone. He will hire 2 locals at most. 3 would draw attention, Locals he will pick from the saloon back room and Silver Pine men, he can pay $50 apiece in advance. They will be drunkards or hard cases who have done this kind of work before. They will be armed, but not disciplined. Vance himself will be the danger. The locals are paid to make noise and fill space. Vance is paid to do the killing. Zeke nodded. He will come at night. He will come at night, Caleb agreed. Men in his line of work do not like daylight. He will reach the lower trail by dusk. He will give the horses an hour to rest and to feed. He will be at our gate between 8 and 10 this evening. Jedediah leaned forward. The cabin door is solid oak. The bar is 2 inches thick. They can not break it down without an axe, and even then it would take 10 minutes. By the time they got through, we would have shot every one of them through the loopholes by the windows. So they will not come at the door, Caleb said. They will come at the windows, or they will try to draw us out. Zeke had been silent. Now he spoke. They will not come at the door. They will not come at the windows. They will come the way they have always come in every story I have ever heard from frontier men. They will come with a lit lantern and a friendly voice. They will knock on the door and say they are travelers caught in the storm, asking for shelter. They will count on the courtesy of the West, that no man turns another man away from his fire on a night like this. And when we open the door, they will be inside before we know what is happening. Emmeline went very still. How do you know that is what they will do? She whispered. Because that is what I would do, Zeke said, if I were the kind of man Ruster Vance is. Caleb stopped pacing. The 3 brothers looked at each other. They had been brothers for 30 years. They did not need many words. Then we let them. Caleb said. We let them, Zeke agreed. Jedediah's eyes went between them. His face was pale. You cannot mean that, Zeke. You cannot mean for us to open that door for them. I mean exactly that, Zeke said. He turned his face toward where Emmeline sat. His voice softened. Emmeline, listen to me carefully. There is a place on this mountain that none of you knows except me and my brothers. It is a hollow in the rock face 2 miles east behind a frozen waterfall. We call it the Eagle's Nest. My father found it in 1855 when he was prospecting. We hid in it as boys when the Utes came down the valley in 1862. It cannot be seen from any trail. It cannot be seen from any ridge. It is invisible to any man who does not know to look behind that fall of ice. You are going there, Caleb said, with Jed. He will take you there before dark. You will stay there until one of us comes for you. I am not going, Emmeline said. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. 2 saw her. 1 did not. But all 3 felt the iron in her voice. I am not going, she said again. I will not hide in a hole in the rock while 3 men I owe my life to face rifles for me. Not while there is a Winchester in this house and I know how to load it. Emmeline, Zeke said softly. Please, no. Listen to me. I worked at a print shop for 10 years. My father taught me to load a percussion revolver before I was 12 because he said a printer's daughter had a right to defend her father's press. I am not what I look like. I have steady hands. I have read more about the war between the states than most men in this room. I will not run from a man who has come 1,000 miles to murder me. I will not. Caleb actually smiled. It was a thin, grim smile, but it was a smile. She has steel in her, brother, I see that, Zeke said quietly. Then let me stand at a window with a rifle, Emmeline said. Let me be useful. Let me earn what I am. Zeke was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head slow. No, he said, not because you cannot do it, because of something else. Listen to me, Emmeline. If you are in this house when they come, then this becomes a fight over you with you in the middle of it. They will use you against us. They will fire knowing you are behind a wall they can shoot through. They will try to take you alive to use against us if they cannot kill you outright. You being here makes us weaker, not stronger. He paused. He chose the next words carefully. But there is something else, something more. I cannot fight my best fight if I am thinking of you. If I know you are at the cave and you are safe, then my mind is clear and my hands are steady, and the men who come up that road tonight have made the worst mistake of their lives. That is the truth of it. I'm asking you to go to the eagle's nest, not because I think you are weak, but because I cannot be strong if you are here. Will you do this for me, please? She looked at him a long time. The fire crackled. The wind sighed against the cabin. Yes, she said at last. For you. Yes. Caleb let out a breath. He had been holding it. He turned to Zeke. Then we are decided. Jed takes Emmeline to the cave at dusk. I take the high trail with the Sharps rifle and find a position above the road. I will see them before they reach the cabin. I will count their horses. I will let them pass, and then I will close the road behind them so they cannot retreat. You will be at the cabin alone, or they will think you are alone, Zeke said, with the lights out. Caleb gave one short nod. He understood. Jedediah did not. Jedediah stared at his older brother. Zeke, you cannot face three armed men in the dark by yourself. Zeke smiled. It was the smile Emmeline had glimpsed once before, the one that had made her shiver. The smile of a man who knew something his enemies did not. Jedediah, he said quietly, I have lived in the dark for 10 years. The dark is my country. The dark is the only place in this world where a sighted man has no advantage over me. 3 men with lanterns are 3 men I can hear breathing. 3 men with rifles are 3 men whose triggers I will hear cock before they pull. 3 men in my own cabin in the dark with the fire out and the lamps cold are 3 men who have walked into the only place on this earth where I have never once stumbled. He turned his face toward the unseen window. They are bringing the fight to my country, and my country will not be kind to them. There was one more thing. It was Zeke who said it. He said it after Caleb had gone out to the barn to clean and load the Sharps and the Henry repeater. He said it after Jedediah had gone to saddle the horses for the ride to the cave. He said it when only he and Emmeline were left in the cabin, the fire burning low, the November light fading fast outside the small windows. He stood up from the table. He crossed the room to where she sat. He did not reach for her. He stood close, his hands at his sides. Emmeline, there is one more thing I am going to ask of you. Yes, marry me. Before you go to the cave, marry me now, this afternoon, before the men come up the mountain. She stared at him, her hands tightened in her lap. Zeke, I am not asking you because I have suddenly fallen in love with you, he said. Maybe I have and maybe I have not. I do not know yet what is in my heart, and I will not lie to you about it. I am asking you for a different reason. Listen to me carefully. If those men kill me tonight, this land becomes Caleb's and Jedediah's. They are good men, but they are not married men. The land will pass to whichever of them outlives the other. There is no provision for a stranger. But if you are my widow, then you are a Callahan. You have rights to this place that no court in Colorado territory can take from you. Vance and Blackwood cannot touch you. Even Bowman cannot cheat you. You become protected by law in a way no other arrangement can give you. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes, she whispered. I understand. I am asking you because I want you to be safe no matter what happens tonight. That is the whole of it. There is no other reason. I will not pretend there is. But I will not lie to you either, Emmeline. I am asking in the cold, honest light of an afternoon that may be my last, because I would rather have stood next to you for 1 hour as your husband than stood next to you for 50 years as anything less. Her eyes filled. I will marry you, Ezekiel Callahan, she said. Not because of land, not because of law. I will marry you because you are the only man who ever heard me crying. He let out a breath. His shoulders, which had been rigid all afternoon, dropped 1 full inch. Reverend Calhoun was at his small church in Silver Pine. Caleb rode for him. He was back in less than 2 hours, the old Reverend bouncing along behind him on a borrowed mule, his face red from the cold and confusion, but his prayer book in his coat pocket all the same. The wedding took place in the cabin parlor at 4:30 in the afternoon. The light was low and gold through the small window. The fire crackled in the great stone hearth. Emmeline wore the same navy blue traveling dress she had worn down from the mountain that first night, the one Zeke had wrapped in his buffalo coat against the cold. Zeke wore his cleanest white shirt, the cuffs buttoned, his hair combed back. He had shaved that morning. His amber eyes did not find her face when she stood before him, but his head tilted toward her in that way she had come to love, the way of a man who heard the very air change when she walked into a room. Caleb stood at his left shoulder. Jedediah stood at hers. They were the only witnesses. The grandfather clock ticked steadily through the vows. The Reverend asked the questions. Emmeline answered yes. Zeke answered yes. The Reverend pronounced them married in the eyes of and the laws of the Colorado Territory. You may kiss the bride, the Reverend said. Zeke hesitated. He did not know exactly where she was. Emmeline rose up on her toes. She placed her small hand on his roughly shaved cheek. She drew his face down to hers. The kiss was brief. It was clean. It tasted of coffee and the cold air outside. His beard was rough against her chin. His hand came up and rested very lightly at the small of her back, as though he were afraid she would break if he held her any harder. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. So were his. Reverend Calhoun signed the certificate. Caleb signed as witness. Jedediah signed beneath him. The Reverend folded the paper and handed it to Zeke, who could not read it, but who held it carefully against his chest. Emmeline Hayward Callahan, the Reverend said quietly, "You are home now, child." She nodded. She could not trust her voice. The Reverend rode back down the mountain alone. The light was almost gone. There was no time for a wedding supper. There was barely time for Jedediah to saddle the horses. Emmeline put on Zeke's buffalo coat, the same one she had worn down the mountain that first night. Jedediah loaded a knapsack with bread and dried venison and a single canteen of water. He slung a rifle across his back. Zeke walked her to the door. He did not say much. He took her face in his two large calloused hands. He found her brow with his thumb. He found her mouth. He kissed her very gently on the lips. "Listen to me," he said. "You will be cold in that cave. You will hear noises. The water of the fall will sound like men coming. The wind in the rocks will sound like rifle shots. Do not move from that cave until Jedediah or Caleb or I come for you, not for anything. Promise me, I promise." "Winter always ends," he said. "Winter always ends," she answered. She stepped through the door into the gathering dark. Jedediah lifted her up into the saddle. The horses moved off into the trees, their breath making slow ghosts in the cold air. Zeke stood on the porch listening until he could no longer hear the hooves. Then he turned and walked back into the cabin. Caleb was already at the door, the Sharps rifle across his shoulder, 2 extra cartridges in his coat pocket. The Henry repeater leaned against the post. The cabin was quiet. "I will be on the high cut with the Sharps," Caleb said. "I will see them before they reach the gate. I will not fire unless they retreat. If they retreat, I will close the road. If they reach the cabin, I will move down behind them." Zeke nodded. Caleb did not move for a moment. Then he gripped his older brother's shoulder. "Brother," he said, "be alive when this is over." "I intend to be," Zeke said. Caleb walked out into the dark. Zeke barred the door behind him. Then he began to put out the lights. He started with the kerosene lamp on the table. He blew it out. The flame died with a small wet sound. He moved to the small lamp on the kitchen counter. He blew it out as well. He moved to the candle on the mantel. He pinched the wick between his fingers. He felt the heat sting his calloused skin. The candle died. He went last to the fire in the great stone hearth. He did not put it out. He did not need to. He threw a heavy iron lid over the coals, smothering most of the glow. The cabin went from warm orange firelight to dim red ember light to almost nothing at all. He stood in the middle of his own house. He could not see any of it. He had not been able to see any of it for 10 years. Tonight was no different from any other night for him. But for the men who were coming tonight would be very different indeed. He walked to the chair by the hearth. He sat. He laid the long, heavy hickory staff across his knees. He listened to his own breathing slow. He listened to the wind outside the cabin. He listened to the slow tick of the grandfather clock. The clock chimed 7. The clock chimed 8. At 20 minutes past 9, he heard them. 3 horses, coming up the road, slowly walking, not trotting, trying to be quiet on the frozen ground, but unable to fully hide the heavy thump of shod hooves on cold earth. The loud rider weighed less than the other two. Vance. Behind him, 2 heavier men, local hires. The horses stopped about 40 yards from the cabin. He heard them dismount. He heard the soft clink of bridles being looped over a porch post. He heard a low murmur of voices, 3 men, 1 giving instructions, 2 listening. A lantern was lit. He heard the flint strike the small whoosh of the wick catching. Footsteps approached the porch. 1 pair of boots, heavier boots, walking confidently, the local. The other 2 would be flanking 1 to each side of the cabin. The boots crossed the porch. They stopped at the door. A heavy fist knocked. 3 solid raps. "Hello, the cabin?" a voice called out. The voice was rough and friendly. Texas accent. "Buck, stranger and a couple of friends caught in this storm coming up. We saw your light a while back. We seem to have lost it now. We were hoping you could spare a corner of your fire for a couple of hours till the worst of it passes." Zeke did not answer for a moment. He was listening to the 2 flanking men. One was at the south wall. He had stepped on a frozen branch and he was trying to be still. The other was at the north wall. He had a hand on the window shutter and was very quietly testing whether it could be opened from the outside. Zeke smiled in the dark. He raised his voice. "The door is barred from inside. Hold a moment. I am alone here and I am slow. I am coming." He stood up from the chair. He walked silently across the cabin. He did not need to walk silently. They could not hear him over their own preparations. But silence was a habit. He reached the door. He set the hickory staff against the wall. He lifted the heavy oak bar. He set it gently on the floor. He stepped to the side of the door, his back against the cold log wall. Then he reached out and unlatched the door, and he gave it a small push so that it swung inward. "Come on in," he called. "The fire is low, but the company is welcome." There was a half-second pause. The lantern light spilled into the dark cabin from the porch. Buck, the heavier man, stepped through the doorway with his lantern raised in his left hand and his revolver drawn in his right. He took 2 steps in. He squinted. He was looking for the man who had spoken. He could not see anyone in the dim red glow of the smothered hearth. The other 2 flanking men, hearing Buck enter, came around to the door. The first was a thin, nervous boy, 20 years old, named Slim. He stepped through the door behind Buck, his rifle level. The third man was Ruster Vance himself. Vance hung back at the porch just outside the door, his own revolver low and ready, his hollow cheeks lit yellow by the lantern, his dead eyes scanning the dark interior. Zeke was between them and the door. They had walked past him without seeing him. He was a man who did not need light, standing perfectly still against a wall in a darkened cabin while 3 armed men stepped into a room they could not properly see. He moved. His left hand closed on Slim's right wrist, the wrist holding the rifle. He twisted hard. Slim cried out. The rifle clattered to the floorboards. Zeke's right elbow came up and back, smashing into the side of Slim's neck just below the ear. Slim went down like a dropped sack of flour. Buck spun the lantern, swinging wide. The light arced across the room. He saw a shape moving low and fast in the dark. Buck fired his revolver at the shape. The shot was wild. It went into the wall above the hearth, sending splinters of cedar into the room. The muzzle flash for 1 brief second lit the cabin like noon. In that flash, Buck saw the blind man's milky eyes turned away from him, 1 ear cocked forward, the broad shoulders set low, the hickory staff already in his right hand. The light died. The flash was gone. The cabin was dark again. For Buck, the cabin was utterly black. He could not see the floor. He could not see the walls. He could not see his own gun in his hand. For Zeke, nothing had changed. The hickory staff swung in a tight, low arc. It caught Buck across the kneecap. There was a sick crack. Buck screamed. His leg buckled. He went down hard. The lantern fell from his hand, hit the floor, rolled on his side, and went out as the wick struck the kerosene puddle and flared, and then sputtered, dead. Now there was only the dim red ember glow from the smothered hearth. In the doorway, Ruster Vance had heard the scuffle. He had heard the shot. He had heard Slim drop. He had heard Buck scream. He had not seen the blind man. Now he saw a shape rising up in the dim red glow of the cabin. A massive shape. Calm. Untroubled. Moving with the slow, sure grace of a man walking through his own kitchen. Vance fired 3 times into the cabin. The first shot went into the ceiling. The second shot went into the wall. The third shot went into the chair by the hearth, splintering the wood where Zeke had been sitting an hour before. Zeke was already to the side. He had heard the trigger cock before the first shot. He had counted the shots as they came. 3. The Colt revolver Vance carried held 5 before reload. 2 more. Zeke moved. He moved sideways along the inside wall, soundless on his own floorboards, every plank known to him by feel. He flanked the door. Vance stood there, framed in the lantern light from the porch, the smoking revolver in his hand, peering into the dark. From 3 feet to Vance's left, Zeke spoke. "You will not bring her back, Mr. Vance." Vance spun. Zeke's hickory staff caught him under the chin. The blow lifted Vance clean off his feet and dropped him on his back on the porch, the revolver flying from his hand and skittering down the steps into the snow. Zeke stepped through the doorway. He stood over the fallen man. Vance was conscious but stunned, gasping, his hands clawing at the boards of the porch. Zeke set the heel of his boot on Vance's chest very gently and pressed down just enough to remove all interest in standing up. "Stay there, Mr. Vance," Zeke said. "The night is young." Out on the high trail, Caleb had heard the gunshots. 3 from inside the cabin, 3 from the door, then silence. He was already moving the Sharps rifle in his hands, sliding down the slope through the moonlit snow toward the road behind the cabin. That was when the 4th man came. Vance had not hired only 2 locals. He had hired 3. The 3rd had been hanging back on the road as a rear guard with the spare horses. He heard the shooting at the cabin. He spurred his horse forward. He came up the road at a full gallop, rifle raised. Caleb saw him coming up the road. Caleb dropped to one knee in the snow. He raised the Sharps. He breathed out. He fired once. The 4th man went off the back of his horse like a rag doll. He hit the road and did not move. The horse ran on into the dark. Caleb worked the breech, ejected the spent shell, slid in another. He waited. There were no more. He came down off the high cut. He walked around to the front of the cabin. He found his older brother standing on the porch with one boot on the chest of a hollow-cheeked man whose head was bleeding from where the hickory staff had caught him. "You all right, Zeke?" "I am all right." Inside, Caleb saw the 2 locals sprawled on the cabin floor. Buck was conscious, holding his shattered knee with both hands, weeping with rage and pain. Slim was unconscious, his rifle on the floor where it had fallen, his neck already bruising where Zeke's elbow had caught him. Caleb whistled low. "You did all this in the dark. I did all this in my own house," Zeke said. "There is a difference." They tied Vance to the porch post. They dragged Buck inside and tied him to a chair. They dragged Slim to the kitchen and tied him to another. They sent Jedediah down the trail at first light to fetch the sheriff from Silverpine. Hank Williams arrived at noon the next day with 2 deputies. He took one look at the 4 men, the dead one frozen now in a wagon Caleb had hauled in from the road, the 3 live ones tied and bandaged in the cabin and on the porch, and he removed his hat and rubbed his head. "Zeke," he said, "I have known you all my life. I never want to be on the wrong side of a door from you on a dark night. You should not be on the wrong side of any door from a man who works honest, Hank. That is the truest thing you ever said." It was while the deputies were searching Ruster Vance's coat that they found the contract. Jedediah was the one who unfolded it first. He read it. His face went very pale. He passed it to Caleb. Caleb read it. His amber eyes went hard. He passed it to Hank Williams. The sheriff read it, and then he read it a second time because he could not believe it the first time. Then he read it aloud so that Zeke could hear the words. The contract was on the letterhead of Silas Blackwood of Boston, Massachusetts. It hired Ruster Vance of New York City for a single job. The job was the location and termination of one Emmeline Hayward, age 23 of Boston. The fee was $200 on commencement and $500 on confirmation of completion. Confirmation of completion was specified to require a personal item belonging to the deceased to be returned to Mr. Blackwood as proof. The contract was witnessed by two clerks in the Boston office of Blackwood Textile and signed and sealed in red wax. It was not a contract to bring her home. It was a contract for her death. Emmeline came down from the cave at noon. Jedediah brought her in. She had not slept. Her face was white with cold and exhaustion. When she walked into the cabin and saw the four bound men and the sheriff standing by the table, she went very still. Caleb did not waste time. He read her the contract. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he reached the end, where it specified that proof of her death was required for the final payment, her knees gave out. Zeke caught her. He did not see her fall. He heard her knees buckle, and he heard her catch her breath, and he stepped forward in time to take her weight in his arms. "He wanted me dead," she whispered. "The whole time. He never wanted me back. He wanted me dead. I know, Emmeline." She wept against his chest. He held her with one large hand cupped at the back of her head, the way a man holds something that has nearly slipped from him forever. "He will not touch you again," Zeke said quietly. "Sheriff, that contract goes back to Boston with my brother on the next train. It goes to the Pinkerton agency in New York, who have a complaint of their own with Mr. Vance. And it goes to a journalist at the Boston Transcript, who I am told was once a friend of a printer named James Hayward. 3 copies. One of them will reach the prosecutor in Boston before the month is out." Hank Williams nodded. "I will see to it personally." The 4 prisoners went down the mountain that afternoon, lashed to the wagon Caleb had built 10 years before. Vance did not speak. His hollow cheeks were bruised yellow. His dead eyes had gone duller still. He knew as well as any man who had ever walked a gallows what was coming. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived from Boston. It was from a lawyer Caleb had hired through a contact in Denver. The letter was 3 pages long. Silas Blackwood had been arrested within 5 days of the contract reaching the prosecutor's office. Combined with the documents James Hayward had hidden in his print shop documents, which Emmeline had now been able to direct the lawyers to the case against Blackwood, was immense. Illegal child labor, forgery, counterfeiting, conspiracy, 2 counts of murder, including James Hayward and Blackwood's own first wife. He would not see daylight again. The lawyer estimated a sentence of no less than 30 years and possibly the gallows. The Blackwood Mill was being liquidated to pay damages to families of the children harmed. There was one more thing. The lawyer wrote that James Hayward had not been as poor as his daughter believed. He had kept a private account open under the name of an old friend in 1869 against exactly the kind of trouble he had eventually fallen into. The account contained $1,512 in gold plus accrued interest. It was now legally Emmeline's. With the additional damages awarded from the Blackwood estate, her total inheritance would come to nearly $3,000. She was, by the standards of the Colorado Territory in 1879, a woman of independent means. Caleb read the letter aloud at the kitchen table that evening. The fire was high, the cabin smelled of stew and wood smoke. When he reached the figures, he stopped reading. He looked across the table at his older brother. Zeke had gone very still. Jedediah said softly, "Em, you could go home now. You could go anywhere. You have enough to start fresh." Zeke did not say anything. He did not move. Emmeline looked at her husband. She saw the stillness. She understood it. He was waiting for her to leave him. He had been waiting for her to leave him from the moment he had said his vows. She rose from the table. She went to him. She did not take his hand. She crouched before his chair, her hands on his knees. "Zeke, look at me, with whatever you look at me with." His sightless eyes turned toward the sound of her voice. "I am not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I went 1,000 miles to find a place where someone would see me. I found that place. It is here, with you. The money does not change that. The freedom does not change that. I am not going back to Boston. I am not going to Denver. I am not going to San Francisco. I am staying. I am staying with you. I am staying on this mountain. I am staying in this cabin. I am staying as your wife. I am staying. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was rough. Are you sure, Emmeline? I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything. He nodded once, slow. Then he reached up and he found her face and he drew her gently to him and he kissed her. Not the brief, careful kiss of the wedding. This kiss was different. This kiss was a man who had been holding his breath for 3 weeks, finally letting it out. When he pulled back, he pressed his forehead to hers. Welcome home, Emmeline Callahan, he whispered. I am home, she whispered back. That night after Caleb and Jedediah had gone quietly to the bunkhouse without being asked, Zeke took her hand and led her to the bedroom that had been his father's. He stood at the door. He held it open. He did not push her through. Are you sure? He asked one last time. I am your wife, she said. I am sure. The door closed softly behind them. Outside, the first heavy snow of January began to fall, a slow, patient white fall against the dark windows of the Callahan Ridge cabin. Inside, the fire burned low and a blind man and the woman he had heard crying in a forest 3 months earlier finally became in every way that the word can mean anything, husband and wife. When the morning came, she woke in his arms. He was already awake. He had been listening to her breathe. How long have you been awake? She asked softly. Just listening to you, he said, in my own way. What do you hear? I hear your heart. Slow, peaceful, for the first time since I have known you. She smiled against his chest. She closed her eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling and the wind kept rising and the long Colorado winter rolled on across the mountains. But inside the cabin on the Callahan Ridge, the worst of the winter by far was already behind them. That winter, the long cold months of January and February and March became the gentlest season Emmeline Callahan had ever known. The cabin no longer felt like a place she was visiting. It felt like a place she had built board by board with her own hands. She moved through its rooms now with an ease she had not believed she would ever feel again in any house. The salt was 6 inches from the corner of the counter. The flour was on the right-hand side of the second shelf. The matches were in the small tin nailed to the post beside the hearth. She knew these things now the way Zeke knew them, not because she could not see, but because they were hers. She cooked. She read aloud to Zeke in the long evenings the worn copy of Walt Whitman she had carried from Boston, her father's only legacy other than ink-stained fingers and a love of straight lines. She read to Caleb and Jedediah too when they came in from the cold and sat by the hearth with their boots steaming. Caleb did not comment on the poems, but she noticed that he no longer left the room when she opened the book. Zeke taught her to listen. He taught her every day. He taught her the difference between the cry of a hawk and the cry of an owl. He taught her how to know when the creek was about to thaw 3 days before the ice broke by the way the water sang under the surface. He taught her how to tell a healthy cow from a sick one by the way it breathed in the dark. By March, she could identify Saber the black stallion by the sound of his hooves on the frozen yard. By April, she could tell which of the brothers was at the door before they spoke. And he taught her to be still. That she said had been the hardest thing of all. Caleb thawed. It took the whole of February for him to do it. But one morning she came out for breakfast and found a small wooden box on her chair. Inside was a brass thimble and a folded packet of fine sewing needles and a card of black thread. There was no note. He did not look at her when she thanked him. But that was the morning he started calling her Em. Jedediah took longer to forgive himself than Caleb took to forgive her. He had carried the weight of his deception of the letter he had written under his brother's name like a stone in his coat pocket. It was Zeke who finally took the stone away. Zeke said one evening in March, as the 3 brothers sat at the table after Emmeline had gone to bed, "You wrote that letter without my permission. You lied to a woman about who I was. You brought her here under a false flag. Yes, Jedediah said quietly. You also gave me the only good thing that has happened to me in 10 years. Jedediah did not answer for a long time. When he did, his eyes were wet. I am sorry, Zeke. Do not be sorry, Zeke said. Just do not ever do it again. There are some kinds of luck a man does not earn twice. By the time the snow began to recede from the southern slopes in April, the four of them, the three brothers, and the woman, had become something Emmeline did not have a word for. A family was the closest word, but it was deeper than that. It was four people who had stood in the dark together and decided to keep standing. Spring came hard and bright to the Callahan Ridge. The thaw began at the lower elevations and worked its way up, opening the road to Silver Pine for the first time since November. The first wagon to come up was Reverend Calhoun, bringing the official marriage certificate, registered now in the territorial records at Denver. He stayed for supper. He laughed at Caleb's stories about the four men in the wagon being hauled down the mountain that snowy noon. He blessed the cabin before he left, his old hand resting on Zeke's shoulder for a long moment at the door. You are a husband now, Ezekiel, the Reverend said. Do not forget what that means. I will not, Zeke said. The grass came in green on the high meadows by the middle of May. The cattle, lean from the winter, began to fatten. The creek, swollen with snowmelt, ran loud day and night against the rocks. Birds returned. Emmeline learned the names of them all. The mountain bluebird, with its feathers the exact color of the noon sky. The varied thrush, singing its strange single note from the dark places under the pines. The red-tailed hawk turning slow, lazy circles over the high meadows, looking for ground squirrels. She planted her first garden that spring, the long rectangle of turned dark earth on the south side of the cabin. She put in potatoes and cabbages and onions and carrots. She put in herbs in a smaller bed near the kitchen door, sage and thyme and rosemary and basil. And along the south wall of the cabin, where the morning sun would reach them first, she planted a yellow rose. She had carried the cuttings from Boston wrapped in damp newspaper and tucked into the bottom of her valise. They had come from a bush her mother had tended in the alley behind the print shop, the only living thing in that gray neighborhood that bloomed yellow against the soot. Emmeline had not been sure they would survive the winter buried at the back of her trunk, but they had. She put them in the ground on a warm morning in May. Zeke stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his face turned toward the sun. What color are they, he asked. Yellow, she said. Gold, like sunlight on hay. Then when they bloom, he said, we will know it is the warm part of summer. By the smell. She had laughed at that. She had laughed easy now in a way she had not laughed in Boston for a very long time. The community wedding came in June. It was Caleb's idea. The hurried wedding in November, he said, was a wedding of fear. Emmeline deserved a wedding of joy. He rode down to Silver Pine in May to make the arrangements himself. He spoke to Reverend Calhoun. He spoke to the wives of the town. He spoke to Mr. Hatfield at the bank, who released enough of the Hayward inheritance to pay for what Caleb said needed paying for. When Caleb came back, he had a list. Jed was sent to Denver on the stage for a dress. He came back 4 days later with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a wedding gown of cream-colored silk, simple and cut with a small spray of pearl beads at the neck. It had cost more money than the brothers had spent on themselves in 5 years. Jedediah handed the parcel to Emmeline without a word and walked outside before she could thank him. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in late June. The whole town of Silver Pine made the trip up the mountain. 60 wagons in a long, bright line, climbing the road that Reister Vance had climbed 7 months before, but climbing it now in sunshine and laughter and carriages full of fiddles and pies and barrels of lemonade. They held the ceremony in the south meadow of the ranch under a temporary arch of pine boughs that Jedediah had built. The Reverend stood at the altar. Caleb stood at his older brother's left shoulder. Jedediah stood at his right. Emmeline walked alone down the meadow toward them, her cream silk dress brushing the new grass, her hair loose at her shoulders, the way Zeke had asked. When she reached the altar, Zeke held out his hand. She placed hers in it. I cannot see your dress, Zeke said quietly. Tell me what it looks like, Emmeline answered. With your other eyes. Zeke smiled. He raised his free hand. Very gently, he ran his fingertips along the line of her shoulder, down her arm, along the fabric at her waist. He felt the smooth silk. He felt the small spray of pearls at her throat. He felt the loose softness of her hair. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever touched," he said. The Reverend laughed. He read the vows. They were the same vows the old man had read in November. But now there were 60 witnesses, in a sky the color of cornflowers, and a wind that smelled of wildflowers, and Emmeline's hand in Zeke's, and her voice strong and clear when she said, "I do." Reverend Calhoun pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," he said, for the second time in their lives. Zeke kissed her in the sunshine in front of all the town, with the wind moving through her hair and his good arms strong at her back. The town clapped. Children threw rice. The fiddles started up almost before the kiss had ended. There was a feast in the meadow that lasted until sundown. There was dancing. Caleb danced with the school teacher, Lizzie Brown, a slim young woman with brown eyes and a laugh like falling water. Jedediah danced with the Reverend's youngest daughter, Mary Bell Calhoun, whose father had remarried 5 years earlier to a widow with 2 children. When the sun finally dipped behind the western peaks, Zeke walked Emmeline back to the cabin. The cabin was quiet. The brothers were still down at the meadow, helping to clean up. Zeke walked Emmeline up the porch steps. He stopped at the front door. He took out his pocket knife, the bone-handled one his father had carried before him. "Emmeline, there is something I want to do before we go in." "What is it?" He turned to face the door frame. The wood was cedar weathered gray by 10 winters. He found the smooth section to the right of the latch, the section a person's eye would see when they walked up to knock. Slowly, carefully, he began to carve. He worked by touch. The blade bit into the wood. The chips fell away. Letter by letter, he carved their initials in the year Z, C, and Eking, 1879. The strokes were rough but clean. He had done this kind of carving before. He had carved his father's initials into a tree the day they buried him. When he was finished, he closed the knife. He placed his hand flat over the carving. He took her hand and placed it over his. "Now you are written into this house, Emmeline, not just in paper, in wood. The wood will outlast the paper." She did not answer. She did not need to. She slipped both her arms around his waist and rested her face against his chest, and they stood there on the porch in the soft June twilight. And below them in the meadow, the fiddles still played, and above them, the first stars of the night came on one by one in the long, gentle blue of the western sky. The years began to come faster after that. They always do when you are happy. Their first son was born in February of 1880. The labor came on hard during a snowstorm so heavy that Caleb could not ride down to Silver Pine for the doctor. Emmeline labored for 11 hours in the bedroom that had been Thomas Callahan's with Mary Bell Calhoun, who had stayed at the cabin since Christmas attending her, and with Caleb pacing the parlor, and Jedediah praying silently at the kitchen table, and Zeke sitting in the rocking chair by the bedroom door, his face turned toward the sound of his wife's voice, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. When the baby came at last, just before dawn, Mary Bell brought him out wrapped in a blanket and placed him in his father's arms. "A boy," she said softly, "a strong boy, strong as his father." Zeke held the baby. He did not move. He did not breathe. Mary Bell watched him. After a moment, she saw the tears begin to slide down his cheeks 2 at a time into his beard. He had not held a child in his hands since his own brothers were small. "What does he look like?" he said, his voice rough. "He has your jaw," Mary Bell said. "He has his mother's nose. His eyes are blue, but Mary Bell says all babies start blue, and they may go to brown like yours yet." Zeke nodded. He was still not moving. He was running his thumb very gently along the soft skin of the baby's cheek, learning the boy by touch the way he learned everything. "Hello, son," he whispered. "Hello, Thomas." They named him Thomas James Callahan. Thomas for the grandfather, he would never know the man who had died in the Silver Crown mine. James for the grandfather, he would never know the printer who had died because he had a conscience. The boy's first inheritance was the names of 2 good men. Tom grew quickly. By the summer of 1881, he was crawling everywhere on the cabin floor, and Zeke had to learn a whole new way of walking, learning the small, soft sound of a baby's hands and knees, learning to listen for him as carefully as he had once listened for Vance and his men in the dark. By the time Tom was 2, he had learned to come when his father whistled. By the time he was 3, he had begun to go quiet on purpose when his father walked into a room just to see how long it would take before Zeke could find him. Zeke could always find him. Sarah Mae Callahan was born in the spring of 1883, a girl this time with hair as fair as her mother's and eyes that did go to the deep cornflower blue that the boys had finally darkened away from. They named her Sarah for Emmeline's mother, the woman who had died of fever in Boston before Emmeline was old enough to remember her. May was Mary Bell's middle name. Mary Bell by then had been at the cabin so often that Caleb had finally found his courage. They were married in the autumn of 1883. It was a small wedding in the same South Meadow where Emmeline and Zeke had married with most of the same guests. Reverend Calhoun officiated. He was nearly 70 by then, his hands shaking with the small palsy of age, but his voice still strong. Mary Bell was radiant. Caleb, who had grown his beard out for the occasion, looked like a man who had finally found something he had been hunting for his whole life. But the wedding was followed 3 days later by a funeral. Mary Bell's stepmother, the Reverend's second wife, had been ill all autumn. She had wanted to live to see her stepdaughter married. She did. She held Mary Bell's hand at the wedding feast, and she ate the wedding cake, and she told Caleb that she had never seen a kinder bridegroom. 3 days later, she went to bed with a fever and did not get up. The funeral was at the small white church in Silver Pine. The whole town came. Reverend Calhoun, who had buried so many other people, could not bring himself to officiate at his own wife's grave. A visiting circuit preacher said the words. Mary Bell wept against Caleb's shoulder. Emmeline held Mary Bell's hand on the other side. The 4 of them stood at the graveside in the cold November rain, and after, when the dirt had been thrown, Reverend Calhoun raised his head and looked at them. A wedding and a funeral in 1 week, he said softly. That is how God reminds us. Life and death stand next to each other always. Be grateful for every breath, my children. There are not as many as you think. They walked back to their wagon in silence. That night at the cabin, after Tom and Sarah were asleep, Emmeline came out to the porch and found Zeke sitting alone in the dark, the harmonica idle in his hands. Are you all right? She asked. I am thinking about my own mother, he said, about the year she died. I have not thought about that in a long time. What is the thinking? She died alone in this cabin. We were down at the herd. There was no one with her when she went. I have always carried that. I will carry it until I die. He paused. I do not want it to be like that for you, Emmeline. If I go before you, I do not want you to be alone. You will not go before me, she said. He smiled. He did not contradict her. He just patted the bench beside him. She came and sat. He played the harmonica softly in the dark, the slow, mournful melody that had no name, and the wind moved through the high pines the way it always moved. The barn raising came in the summer of 1882. A late spring tornado, the only one anybody could remember on the ridge, had touched down on the South Meadow and ripped the barn nearly off its foundation. The roof was gone. 2 walls had collapsed. The cattle had survived, scattered across the lower meadow, but the structure was a ruin. Caleb had walked down to Silver Pine to see about hiring men to help rebuild. He had not even reached the town before the news had spread ahead of him. By the time he got back to the ridge, riders were already coming up the road behind him. 40 men, 15 wagons. They came up that road in a long line on a Saturday morning, and they brought their wives, and they brought their children, and they brought hammers and saws and barrels of nails and stacks of cut lumber. They did not ask if they could help. They simply came. The barn was up by sundown, 2 walls and roof rebuilt in a single day, the way it had always been done in the West, the way it would not be done much longer as the railroads came in and the towns grew larger and the mountain communities began their long, slow fading. But on that day, the old way still held. 40 men with hammers and 1 barn raising under a clear blue sky. Emmeline and Mary Bell and the wives of Silver Pine cooked all day. pies and biscuits, and 3 whole hogs and barrels of lemonade, and pots of black coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The children played in the meadow. Tom, 2 years old, ran with the older boys, falling and getting up and falling again, his face streaked with dirt and joy. When the sun went down and the new wall stood and the men came in for supper, Reverend Calhoun, near the end of the meal, stood up at the head of the long trestle table in the meadow. He held up his glass of cider. "I have known the Callahans all my life," he said. "I knew Thomas. I knew Margaret. I know these 3 boys who were boys when their father died and who have grown into the kind of men this country needs. I have watched them keep this ranch alive through 10 hard winters, through grief and through hardship and through the kind of hurts the world hands a man." He turned his face towards Zeke, sitting at the head of the table. "I have not always been sure of what God meant when he took your sight, Ezekiel. I am not sure now, but I will say this. You are one of us, Ezekiel Callahan. You have always been one of us. We were just slow to come back up the mountain after the blast. That was our failing, not yours. We are here now, my friend. We are here." He drank his cider. The whole town drank with him. Zeke nodded once slow and lifted his own glass, and Emmeline saw the shine of moisture at the corner of his sightless eyes. That was the night the cabin on the Callahan Ridge stopped being a refuge from the world. That was the night it became a part of it. The years moved on. James Ezekiel Callahan was born in the autumn of 1886, the 3rd child. He had his mother's gentle hands and his father's quiet way of standing very still and listening before he spoke. He would grow up to be the brother Tom relied on, the one who saw things the others did not. Jedediah married Lizzie Brown in the summer of 1888. The school teacher and the youngest brother, a love that had been growing for 5 years before either of them quite knew what it was. They moved into the bunkhouse, which Jedediah had been steadily expanding into a proper cottage for 2 years. Their first child, a girl named Margaret, after the grandmother, was born the following spring. Ellie Rose Callahan was born to Zeke and Emmeline in the spring of 1890. She was the last of their children. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's amber eyes that did, in her case, see. She was a bright, happy child, the youngest of 4, and Tom, 10 years old by then, and already as tall as his shoulder reached his father's elbow, appointed himself her permanent guardian. Tom was the one who had inherited Zeke's gift for listening. By the time he was 8, he could hear a horse coming up the road from the lower trail a quarter-mile away before anyone else in the cabin knew the rider was on the property. Zeke would sit with him on the porch in the long summer evenings, and they would close their eyes together, and Zeke would say, "What do you hear?" son, and Tom would tell him, and his answers were almost always right. "You are going to be a fine listener," Tom Zeke told him one evening when the boy was 9. "You are the best listener in the world, Pa. I was not always, son. I was a man who had to learn it. You are a boy who has it because you wanted it. That is a different and better thing." In the year 1900, when Emmeline was 45 and her hair held the first thin stripes of silver at the temples, she did something that surprised even herself. She wrote a book. She had been keeping a journal since the year of her arrival at the ridge, off and on when there was time. The journals had piled up in the bottom of her trunk, a stack of small leather notebooks. One winter, when the snow was deep and the children were old enough not to need her every hour, she began to read them through. She found to her surprise that what was written there was not the diary of a woman, but the story of a marriage. She showed the notebooks to Zeke. He could not read them, but she read them aloud, sitting by the hearth in the long January evenings. She read him the story of her arrival, her crying in the forest, the buffalo coat, the council at the kitchen table when she had first found Bowman's cheating the harmonica lesson, the night of Vance, the wedding in the summer meadow. She read him the births of their children. She read him the death of Reverend Calhoun's wife. She read him the barn raising. "You should write this down for other people," Zeke said one night. "Other people would not care." "Yes, they would," he said. "There are women in this country who think they are alone with what they carry. They are not. You should let them know." So she did. She arranged the journals into a manuscript. She titled it "The Mountain That Saw Me." She mailed it to a publisher in Denver. 6 months later, she received a contract and an advance check for $200. The book came out in 1901. It sold well. It did not make her rich, but it brought her enough to do something else she had been wanting to do. She opened the first school in Silver Pine. The town had survived for 30 years without a proper schoolhouse. Children had been taught at home or by the wives of the town in shifts. Emmeline used her royalties and a portion of her father's inheritance still untouched all these years to build a one-room schoolhouse on the southern edge of town. She furnished it with desks Jedediah carved by hand. She stocked a small library with books she ordered from Boston and New York. She wrote to the Territorial Board of Education and obtained certification. The school opened in the autumn of 1902, with 33 children ranging from age 6 to age 14. Emmeline was the only teacher. She taught them Walt Whitman. She taught them long division in the history of the Republic and the geography of the territories. She taught them the names of the wildflowers and the names of the constellations and the way the wind sounded different at different elevations. She taught them what her father had taught her. She taught them what Zeke had taught her. Most of all, she taught them that to be seen by another human being was the most important thing in the world, and that the way to see another person was first to listen. She taught at that school for 15 years. By 1908, the cabin on the Callahan Ridge had become a different place. Zeke had built 2 additional rooms on its north side. Caleb had built his own house a quarter-mile down the meadow where he and Mary Bell and their 4 children lived now in considerable comfort. Jedediah had expanded the bunkhouse into a proper home for his own family, which had grown to 3. The ranch itself had grown to 900 head of cattle. The original 200 when Emmeline arrived had been a small operation. The Callahan brothers, with the help of Mr. Hatfield at the bank in Silver Pine, and the disappearance of Henry Bowman, who had moved away to Denver in 1880 after the matter of his cheating became publicly known, had built one of the largest ranches in the county. The fortune that came in from those 900 head, along with what was left of the Hayward inheritance and the royalties from Emmeline's book, made the Callahans, by the standards of Mountain, Colorado in 1908, prosperous. Not rich, never rich, but comfortable, educated, respected. In the summer of 1908, on a hot afternoon in late June, the Callahan Ridge held a family gathering. Tom, 28 years old now, and a doctor in Denver drove up from the city with his wife Lillian and their 3 children, the oldest of whom was 9. Sarah May, 25, came in from her ranch in Wyoming with her husband and their 4 young ones. James, 21, was at college in Boston studying to be a lawyer and could not come. Ellie Rose, 18, was home from the seminary at Denver, where Emmeline had insisted she be educated. Caleb's 4 children and Jedediah's 3 were all there. 19 grandchildren and great-nieces and nephews running across the meadows of the Callahan Ridge. Emmeline, 53 years old, with her hair gone almost completely silver, but with the same cornflower blue eyes she had brought from Boston 30 years before, stood on the porch of the original cabin watching them. Her hands rested on the rail. The rail had been rebuilt 3 times since 1878. The cabin itself had been added to until it was barely recognizable as the small, dark structure into which Zeke had ushered her on that snowy night. Zeke came up beside her. He was 61 years old. His hair was white. His shoulders were still broad, but they no longer looked like the shoulders of a young mountain man. The amber eyes were as cloudy as they had ever been. The 10-year-old scars at his temples had faded almost to nothing. He found her hand. She gave it to him. "What are you watching?" he asked. "I am watching the family," she said. "Tell me." She did. She told him about Tom, who was kneeling in the grass showing his eldest son Caleb something he had caught in cupped hands, a beetle perhaps. She told him about Sarah May, who was nursing the youngest of her 4 against her shoulder and laughing at something Mary Bell was saying. She told him about Caleb, who at 58 years old still had the bearing of a man who could ride 100 miles on horseback and not be tired. She told him about Jedediah, who at 55 was sitting on the lower porch step with his youngest niece in his lap, whittling her a wooden horse from a piece of cedar. She told him about the meadow full of summer wildflowers, lupin An Indian paintbrush and columbines, the colors washed in the long gold light of late June. She told him finally about the yellow rose. The rose she had planted in 1879, the cutting from her mother's bush in Boston, had survived 30 seasons. It climbed now along the south wall of the cabin 12 feet high, blooming in profusion in the warm part of every summer. It was blooming now. The whole south wall of the cabin was bright with the small, clean yellow flowers. You can smell them, Emmeline said. Can you not? I can, Zeke said. I always know it is the warm part of summer. By the smell. He drew her hand up and kissed the back of her knuckles. Do you remember he said what I told you the night I asked you to marry me? The first time. In November. I remember, she said. You told me you would rather have stood next to me for 1 hour as my husband than 50 years as anything less. He nodded. It has been 30 years. It has, she said. I have stood next to you for 30 years, Emmeline Callahan. And every hour of it has been more than the hour I asked for. She rested her head against his shoulder. They stood like that on the porch as the long blue mountain twilight came on, and the children chased fireflies in the meadow, and Caleb's old voice called for everyone to come up to the long table for supper. That evening, after the children were in bed and the lamps were low, Emmeline and Zeke sat on the porch alone. The sky was full of stars. The wildflowers in the meadow were ghostly pale.